This is a critical analysis of the film Trollhunter by Phil Foster. The historical focus of this film is based on the folklore behind Norwegian trolls. Several references are made during the film at different points, and it sort of deals with the folklore and the stories and tales that have been told through the years. One of the stories, which is Sora Moria's Castle, it basically describes a tale of how trolls can smell a Christian man's blood. This is relative to the film because in the beginning of the film, when the troll hunter offers the students to go with him and obviously document what's going on and what he's filming, they're actually asked the question, are any of you Christian or do you believe in God? They seem a bit thrown by this question because it's a bit of an odd question to ask, and obviously if you weren't aware of this particular tale then you wouldn't understand why, but obviously being aware of the tale we understand that this could put them in danger. And in fact it does later on. They actually lose the cameraman in a particular scene because they can smell his blood. So it's quite interesting that they managed to integrate that into the film. Another scene, they've actually got the student presenter, he's actually stood and you've got like an idyllic scene behind him. It's quite a nice landscape behind him. Again, this was something I wasn't aware of until doing some research, but it was actually a painting which was done by Theodore Kitzling. And he actually mentions in the film, look, this looks like the famous painting, obviously making reference to it. One that I found really interesting, and it took me a second to click to what was going on. The troll hunt is trying to coax one of the trolls out from under a bridge. Obviously trolls are fairly famous, if anybody knows about trolls, they know they're fairly famous for living under bridges. He needs to get a blood sample because he knows that there's something wrong and they need to try and figure out what's going on. So they're at the bridge, and you obviously got your nighttime scene, and he trots on a goat. And you can hear the goats and the sound effects and everything's going on, and they're sort of setting everything up because the troll's not quite there yet. And then he trots on the second goat, and then he trots on the third goat. And it sort of hails back to the tale of the three billy goats gruff. And it actually made me smile a little bit when he did it, because I sort of clicked when I saw the third one coming on, and I thought, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So it's nice that they're sort of bringing things in that it's not specific to Norway. You know, I mean, obviously coming from the UK, I still know the story. So it's nice that there's references in there that I can relate to, you know, from my childhood. So there is the historical content there is the historical focus there, and it's really interesting how they've sort of spread it out through the film. They haven't sort of thrown it all at you at once. It's spread out through the film, and it's done in a good way because it's all relative to what they're doing at that time. So the film itself is actually set in Norway, and they actually start filming, or they portray the filming being set in the western part of Norway initially, and then obviously moving to the central mountain range, Drovafell. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. So it kind of gives you a basis to work from. You've got an area to work from. You can kind of understand the area that they're working around. And this again ties into the story where you're going from sort of the hill trolls to the mountain trolls, you know, and obviously the transition from that. So you've got an area to work within, and it's quite nice for the dramatization of it, because you can kind of understand the path that they're taking. It's not like it's somewhere where you wouldn't really understand and couldn't find out about. So that, you know, if you wanted to go and find out, you could sort of track where they've been and where they're going. So that's quite nice. As far as the costumes and the things like that go, it's pretty much every day. It's what you'd expect to see, and that in itself adds to the strength and the realism of the footage that has been captured. You know, if you had some like old world stuff in there or something futuristic, it would just totally detract from the film. It wouldn't fit at all, and it wouldn't make sense to put it in there. So the fact that they've kept everything every day, it does just add to the strength of the film. The scene recreation itself, obviously they've had to use CGI to put the likes of the trolls and things in, and we'll come to that in a later comment. But it's interesting the way that they've used the natural environment, that, you know, they've gone outdoors and they've filmed, and it's all there to see, and a lot of it's really nice to look at. And there are some points where it's quite bleak, but again, it sort of shows the different landscapes and how effective and how much strength that can bring to the film, and it does. So I found that really interesting as well, and it just shows it's all out there to go and see if you want to go out and see it. So the film promotes a few different viewpoints. Sort of the viewpoints change as we move through the film. Initially, what we start off with is the students themselves, and they're obviously following the poacher, who they believe to be a poacher at the time, and they're kind of sneaking about a little bit. So it's almost like they're trying to do an expose on him, and find out what he's doing and why he's doing it. Obviously, this viewpoint changes as the movie continues because they find out that he's actually the troll hunter and he works for the TSS, and the story sort of expands from there. So the general viewpoint changes as the movie goes on. We also have the sort of government side of things where they're giving out disinformation through like an environmental service, and again they have the TSS, which is the Troll Security Service. It's all very secretive, so there's kind of their viewpoint, but it isn't really put across because they're a secretive organisation. I find it interesting that initially the students ridicule the poacher because they don't really understand who he really is and what he's really doing, and it's interesting to see that the viewpoint changes, and in fact later on in the movie they actually call him a national hero because of what he does. He feels quite uncomfortable with this, but still it stands that there's a couple of times where the student presenter says he's a national hero. One of the interesting things I found about this film was later on in the film that they have to bring a replacement camera woman in, and Malika, the camera woman, she's asked if she's Christian and does she believe in God, and she seems quite off-put by this. She's put off by it a little bit, and I think really because she obviously replies that she's Muslim, and I think because of the way that the world is, she's seeing it from her viewpoint, where they're kind of asking because it's relative to what's going on at that time. So because there's two different viewpoints there, the question has different meanings. So from Malika's perspective, it's just a religious thing, whereas from the rest of the team, it's a protection thing. Obviously the trolls being able to smell Christian blood, they want to keep themselves protected. So because she doesn't yet know this, she obviously sees it a different way. So I found that really interesting as well. It kind of shows all the different viewpoints and how if you don't have all the information, your viewpoint can be skewed. So the way the cameras are used in this film is quite vital in that it sets the mood for the rest of the film. It has a bit of a rough cut feel to it, so you don't feel like it's a scripted movie where you would get like the mainstream movies and your action movies, things like that. It gives it a bit of a more realistic feel to it. It does have elements where they do interviews, as with the veterinarian. They do an interview, but even that feels a little raw, and I think you'd kind of expect that because with everything that they've been through and everything that's going on and the information that the vet's given them, it's all quite surreal in a way. And it's interesting the way that they sort of approach that using the cameras and the different angles and things. What I also find interesting is when Kaylee, the cameraman, when they're trying to escape from the cave, what had happened is some of the trolls had come back, they were trying to escape and they're almost out, and he's picked up. Now you don't actually see anything, and with the sound and everything, it's kind of left to your imagination as to what's going on. So you hear the crunching of bones and the screams and everything else, and then the camera's dropped and it cracks, and then it fades to black, and you can almost kind of imagine the cameraman being dropped and fading away. So it's quite interesting how they sort of cross that bridge really. They then obviously come back to the camera, it fades back in, and you can see the presenter sat on just outside the cave, and he's in shock, he doesn't know what to do. The sound woman's kind of wandering about a little bit, but what I found interesting was the fact that the troll hunter was kind of in the background a little bit. You could almost see he was sort of mulling over what should I do, because he doesn't want to leave them there, but he feels he needs to go back in and finish the job, and then obviously he says, you know, we're going to have to go back in, or I'll have to go back in. So it was interesting that, you know, he was sort of torn between the two there, and just the way they used the camera to sort of capture that as though you weren't really supposed to be seeing it was quite interesting. So within the film, it doesn't really use any photographs or original film, and I think because of the type of film it is, they can't really do that. Um, the artifacts themselves, I mean, I'd put that down to props to a point. I'd kind of answer that part by saying the use of props is quite clever in that they're using everyday items. So, for example, they use tyres as territory markers, as boundary markers. So it's explained within the film that if a troll comes along and it breaches its territory, it'll obviously find the tyres, it'll gnaw the tyres, and that's an indicator to the troll hunter that they've breached the territory. And it's an everyday item. It's something that you can find pretty much anywhere where there's any remnants of civilization. So it's quite interesting how they use that. And there's another point where he has a really big bear trap, and we're talking really big bear trap, and he puts stone and charcoal on, because again, trolls like to eat stone and charcoal because it's portrayed that they're not very bright and they'll eat pretty much anything. And I suppose put in their position, you take what you can get. So it's interesting how they use that as well. Going back to the tyres, they used they used a shipping container, and it was full of tyres, and it's obviously a storage depot for the troll hunter to go and pick up. And it's all bashed up, and the way that they've used it is they've explained it in that the trolls found it, tried to smash his way in because he smelled the rubber inside and couldn't get in. Again, it's another really clever usage of I suppose an everyday item, something you'd expect to see in certain places. Certainly for people who go out into the wilderness, the woodland walks we have in my area, you will find them. The Forestry Commission will use them, and I'm sure it's the same worldwide. So it's kind of everyday items you'd kind of expect to see, and a clever use of them. So the use of sound and visual effects in this film is quite important. It adds a lot of weight to the film. We start off initially, before the students have actually met the troll hunter properly and understand what it is he does. You see they're sort of sneaking about and they're following him, and you catch the flashes of light, and as it turns out it's UV lights, and he uses it as an offensive weapon to basically kill the trolls, because that's part of what he does, it's part of his job. So it's quite a subtle way of using that particular effect. That coupled with the sound, you get almost like the moaning, screaming sort of sound. Again, it's kind of left to the imagination to a great degree as to what's actually going on, and that I think could be more effective than just an outright, okay, you can see what's going on, because every individual is going to take their own perspective on that. They're going to take their own thing away from it. So it's quite clever how they did that. The CGI itself, I quite like CGI, but I do think it can be overused, and I think they got the balance really well in this film. They didn't overdo it. They kind of kept you hanging on a little bit and sort of waiting for it to come up, and when it did come up, it's not disappointing. It's really well done. They've obviously put a lot of time and effort into it, and again, having sort of touched on 3D animation and things like that myself, I understand the amount of work and the man hours that go into doing something like that. So it's by no means a quick, there you go, we're done. They've put a lot of time and effort and thought into it. So I was really impressed with that, and the fact that they haven't overused it, again, it hasn't spoiled it, because I think if they'd have put too much in, it would have just made it, right, okay, it's just another CGI film. So quite interesting the way they did that, and I'm really pleased with the effect that they got from it. I think the film works on the assumption that the viewer has a little bit of knowledge about Norwegian folklore, specifically trolls, but it is fairly easy to pick up what's going on because there's explanations given throughout the movie, and you kind of pick up what's going on as you go along, so there's no real need to understand initially anything about the film. It did raise some interest in myself, and I've seen the movie a couple of times now, and I know certainly the first time that I saw it, it did inspire me to go away and do a little bit of research myself, just out of general interest as to what the different types of trolls were and where they lived, things like that. So it kind of gave enough information to want you to go and find more. and I think if a film can do that, then obviously they've been successful in that criteria. As far as being entertaining, I found the Troll Hunter himself quite entertaining in a good way, because he's kind of got that military background initially, and he's come in and he's doing what he does, but as the story unfolds he tells you about some of the stuff he's done, and you can see that he regrets doing it, namely one where they had to go and clear an area of trolls, and he was talking about mothers and baby trolls, basically because the government wanted to put a tunnel through somewhere and they decided that they were going to get rid of them. So that, you can sort of see the regret in his face for that, and you can sort of empathize a little bit with him. You know, I mean, if anybody watches the military films, there's always that element that's going to be there where, you know, a commander will do something and it's not a nice call to have to make, but he's the person in the chair that has to make that call. So it kind of goes back to that a little bit, and whilst he did do it, he really regrets it, and I think that kind of adds to the entertainment, because you get an understanding as to why he's decided to expose all of this, because he's just had enough. He just wants to leave, he wants to go, and in fact that's what he does at the end. When he kills the really big troll at the end, once he's done, he just walks off into the snow, and really fitting ending for that, really entertaining. So that's a few comments, a little bit of my view on the movie Troll Hunter. I found it really interesting. It was a low budget film, but I think it shows that even with a low budget you can have really good results. I hope you've enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.